pigeons learn faster than this man. Hello everybody and welcome back to Witchfix. Today we're looking at a film that I have meant to get around to for some time, and first, a confession, because I think I have referred to this film in other reviews that I've done and compared them and sort of talked about the similarities between the themes, but I have never seen the original Wicker Man movie. I know, I come before you as a fraud, as a Philistine, as someone who couldn't be asked, quite frankly. I have seen bits of it. I have seen film analysing videos about it. I have seen a number of videos comparing the original Wicker Man to the hilarious comedy remake starring Nicolas Cage. But I've never sat through the original, and I've just sort of missed out on that. And so I went about rectifying that by ordering a copy of it from eBay and sitting down today and finally watching it. My takeaway from it is these two things. One, clearly times have changed quite a bit. And two, there is a strong case for this being considered a musical, and I don't know how I feel about that. So I'm talking about The Wicker Man from 1973, which I did not realise up until today when I looked it up, that it was based on a book called Ritual, and that book has a sequel. The book of The Wicker Man came out after the film, but prior to the film, there was a novel in 1967 called Ritual, which is actually what this film is based on, not to be confused with the novelisation of the film. And this was followed up a while later by a sequel called The Wicker Woman, with Wicker not spelt as in Wicker chair, but as in Wicca the religion, which I have not read. There's also a spiritual sequel to this movie that is not the hilarious comedy remake starring Nicolas Cage and 400,000 CGI bees. It's called The Wicker Tree, and I actually have a copy of that, so I'll be reviewing that as well. It's not a direct sequel, it is a spiritual sequel, so I don't know that it takes place involving the same characters or any of the same locations. But by the by, this is clearly quite a big phenomenon in that it has spawned a good number of films, and I feel also Midsummer would be quite similar to it as another example of like a daytime horror film where everything takes place, you know, in the broad light of day. So I felt like I had to watch this before I watched any of the other ones, just so that I had a firm basis on which to proceed. I don't have any trigger warnings for this film because, here's the thing, it's not scary. It is unnerving slightly in places, so I guess it is still a horror film, but don't go into it expecting it to be scary, like a traditional horror film that we would see now, because it isn't frightening in that sense. Now, the story is one we'll probably be all familiar with. It's about a policeman who goes to a weird island with a pagan cult on it to investigate the disappearance of a missing girl, and then they burn him to death in a giant wicker man. Spoiler alert, that's what happens in the film. But a lot of other things happen, which I am going to talk about a little bit and sort of dissect, because I feel like the point of the film when it was made was to unnerve Christian conservative audiences with like the weirdness of paganism and all the things that it entails right up until human sacrifice. And I feel like now the policeman definitely reads as the bad guy, which was for me quite an interesting take on the film, using a sort of modern pagan lens to view it. So we're going to go through and discuss that a little bit. So we start with the plane arriving at the island. The policeman arrives by seaplane because I guess it's super far away. As soon as he lands, he hollers to some nearby locals to row out with a dinghy to get him, which seems very presumptuous. Like, don't just arrive and start ordering people around. But they say that he needs permission to come ashore because it's a private island. You need written permission from Lord Summersisle to actually come ashore. Sergeant Howie, who is our main character and has all the personality of an ironing board, starts yelling that basically he received a complaint from someone on the island and he's a police officer, therefore he has the authority to come onto the island. We find out that the person he's looking for is called Rowan Morrison, and he shows around a picture of her which was enclosed with the letter that was sent to him personally but anonymously. The locals say that they don't recognise the girl, she don't live there, but they do know May Morrison, who runs the post office, but she does not have a daughter called Rowan, which is already very suspicious. Now, the difference between this island and the island as portrayed in the comedy remake is that that island was very strange and weird right from the get-go. It seemed to be set in the past compared to contemporary Nicolas Cage's life. It seemed to be very stylized around honey and bees. There were like honeycomb shaped fields and all the rest of it. Summer's Isle in the original movie looks exactly like a sort of Cornish fishing town. It's meant to be on an island in Scotland, but it just has the look of a generally coastal town. Aside from the fact that there is very lush greenery with lots and lots of flowers and palms and things, the kind of things you'd see in warmer areas like Devon, and definitely not on a Scottish island. So there's a slight bit of like weird feeling from seeing that kind of throws the whole scenery off balance, which is kind of cool. Sergeant Howie makes it to the post office to question Mae Morrison, and she sells a lot of very strange looking sweets, some of which are in the shape of like chocolate hairs, which I would love to get my hands on because they look lovely. He speaks to her and she denies that the girl in the picture is her daughter and introduces him to her daughter Myrtle, who is younger than Rowan is meant to be, and who is painting a picture of a hare. When he's left alone with her, Sergeant Howie questions her about where Rowan is, like if she knows Rowan, and she says that Rowan is a hare and lives in the fields. Sergeant Howie then makes it to the local pub to find lodgings for while he's on the island. He's introduced to the landlord's daughter, Willow, who is very blonde and big-eyed, and then everyone in the pub just sings a bawdy song called The Landlord's Daughter, which is the start of many a time when people will just sing songs while occasionally looking directly to camera, which gives the weird feeling that you're in some sort of musical. I have no idea if I like this or not, but it was definitely weird and unsettling, so I'll give it a horror point for that. Sergeant Howie notices that there are pictures of women in white, one for every year, up on the wall, and they are just wearing a white dress and standing behind a bunch of loaves of bread like a harvest festival. But the picture for the previous year is missing. Da-da-da. He is then given some food to go along with his lodging, I guess, which he hates because everything is like tinned and artificial, and his beans are bright blue, which is disturbing, I'll give him that. Willow, while he's eating dinner, is kind of acting a teeny bit saucy. She's like, oh, what would you like for dessert? So I guess that's what passes for saucy in like the 1970s. He then goes outside for, I guess, just like a little evening stroll, and he witnesses in quick succession an orgy that is just taking place outside the pub. Some people watering graves in the graveyard, and a naked woman crying on one of the graves. Now, he doesn't really seem to react to this necessarily. Like, he doesn't really have an emotional reaction. He just is mildly shocked, I would say, and goes back to the pub to go to his room and say his prayers for the night, and we get a flashback of him taking communion. There's then a very long extended scene of Willow in the next room singing a song while she rhythmically thumps the wall, the window frame. She does a little wiggle butt dance. She does some various other things. It just seems like the director threw her a line and just said, okay, now vamp for a bit, and then she continued to vamp for 25 minutes. So it's a very weird scene. Meanwhile, Sergeant Howie, in all his beige pyjamaed, sweaty-faced glory, is plastered up against the adjoining wall as if tempted in the extreme by this song and dance routine that he can't see. So take that for what it's worth. The next day, Howie has breakfast, which is brought to him by Willow, and she asks why he didn't come to her room, and he says he is engaged and he doesn't believe in that sort of thing before marriage, which is all fine and good, but apparently it doesn't even enter his head to think I'm engaged and therefore I shouldn't be fraternising with other women. So clearly his commitment to Christianity, to the laws of his religion, is greater than his commitment to his future wife, which I think says a lot about him. He then goes outside on his investigations once more and sees a maypole being crowned with leaves and the village boys dancing around it to a song which is about basically sex and procreation. He then goes into the school to find that the girls are in class. Why are they in class and the boys get to dance around a maypole? That seems mean. And they are being quizzed on what the pole represents, to which they respond that it is a phallic symbol. And the teacher, Ms. Rose, confirms this and says, yes, the image of the penis is celebrated. Sergeant Howie seems confused by this, not at this point particularly outraged looking, but just, I guess, a little bit shocked. He then completely undermines the fact that he outwardly seems quite calm by telling the teacher that she is peddling filth and he's going to report this on the mainland. We all know he's not going to get a chance to do that, but it's still kind of rude for him to say. He then addresses the class, shows them the picture of Rowan and writes her name on the board, partially erasing a lesson on toadstones and hagstones. He notices, after everyone has said that they don't know who Rowan is, that there is a vacant desk in the room, so obviously they are all lying because someone else should be in this class. He also checks the register and finds that she is in it and her address is given as the post office, so he calls them all despicable liars. The teacher then admits that Rowan is dead, or that he would call her dead because she's actually been reincarnated and reborn as a hare or some other aspect of nature, and that death doesn't really exist for them on the island. They don't talk about it. He asks if they do not learn about God and Jesus, and she says that they learn about Christianity as a comparative religion, which, and I'll just pause here, that is a lot more than I got when I went to church school. Like, we didn't learn about paganism as a comparative religion. We did Hinduism. We did it a lot, but we didn't learn about paganism. So I feel like the island is giving them more than their fair due. He then asks if Rowan is buried in the churchyard, which, come on, really, dude? You still think there's going to be a church here? But she says that she is buried, but in what is no longer really the churchyard, because they don't really have a church anymore, because obviously. He then goes to the not a churchyard and finds that there are some graves there, as you would expect, as well as what look to be like pews and various wood furnishings from inside that have been taken out and just kind of dumped behind the building. He also finds a sort of stone altar outside. I was unclear as to whether this was maybe previously part of the church or not. But on it is a box with maybe 3 apples in it, and he knocks this aside before using 2 pieces of broken wood to make a cross, which seems very disrespectful. He finds a rowan tree. Because most of the people in this are named after plants, they plant that particular plant or tree on their grave when they die. So he finds a rowan tree, correctly assumes that it is Rowan's grave, and her umbilical cord is hanging in the tree, which is weird, and they must have kept that for a really long time. But there we go. He also asked the graveyard keeper where he can find the local minister, which, come on, guy, get a clue. There is no minister. Pigeons learn faster than this man. He then goes to see Mrs. Morrison again and finds her curing the throat of her daughter Myrtle with a frog, which she gets her to hold in her mouth and then spit out again, I guess having transferred the cough, which, you know, does seem kind of like child abuse, but I guess that's just how they practice medicine here. And she does get a gumball afterwards, so I guess that's fine. Howie then visits the registrar to ask about the death register to see if Rowan has been listed on it. She says that he doesn't have the authority to view it without Lord Summersile's permission, and in no uncertain terms he kicks off because he is a policeman and he has the ultimate authority over everybody because he is the law. And she hands over the book, which, fair enough. I wouldn't want to deal with him either. He seems like a prick. He doesn't find Rowan listed in the register, and the registrar doesn't know how she died. So, pretty wasted visit. He then goes to see the chemist, who is also the town photographer and took the summer festival photos that he wants to know about. On the counter, there's just a jar of foreskins. Just chilling. After being told by the chemist that he doesn't have any other copies of the missing photo, and that he doesn't remember Rowan, even though he must have taken her picture only like 6 to 8 months previously, Howie's had enough, so he decides to go and visit Lord Summersile. He is taken by pony and trap out into the countryside, past an orchard where pregnant women are walking through the trees, touching each one, I guess, to bless them or whatever, and then he sees a bunch of naked girls jumping over a small bonfire and chanting, apparently doing some sort of rite of fertility for either themselves or the forest. He then meets Lord Summersile, who is literally the most polite person in the world to him, even though he is kind of a raving gobshite by this point. He goes to Lord Summersile, instantly says he wants to exhume Rowan and have her autopsied on the mainland. Lord Summersile agrees to this, all affability, and says that that's completely fine. When confronted about why he doesn't seem at all concerned about the accusations that Howie is making, he says that they don't have murders on Summer's Isle because they are a deeply religious community and that sort of thing doesn't happen. Sergeant Harry then scoffs and makes light of this and talks about the lessons he witnessed earlier. He asks about the rite with the fire, and Lord Summersile outlines it as being about birth and creation without procreation, which Sergeant Harry scoffs at and says that it's fake biology and fake religion. And Lord Summersile brings up Jesus, who was also born without procreation. So, owned. Lord Summersile then cheerfully declares that the Christian God is dead, having blown his chance in the past, and this produces the most emotional reaction we have yet seen from Sergeant Howie. Given that he's meant to be pursuing a possibly murdered girl here and trying to find out who ostensibly did away with her, the fact that being told that God is dead makes him completely emotional, whereas that didn't, is very telling about him. It's very clear what he cares about the most, and that is his religion. Lord Summersile then delivers a big old smacking law sandwich by saying that 100 years ago, the island they're on was the same as all the others, barren. They were scraping a living from farming sheep, and things were looking pretty dire for them. But then his grandfather bought it and decided he wanted to grow new strains of plants and fruit there, and that to encourage the workforce into working for him and working on the land and giving it their all, he revived the old ways and said that they would be responsible for the changes that would be wrought by the planting of these new plants on the island, which would lead to prosperity. So it seems like there is a scientific reason here for the island to suddenly prosper, that these new fruits and plants were planted there, benefited from the unique conditions on the island with a warm Gulf Stream, and that caused prosperity, which his grandfather then had attributed to the revival of these pagan rites. Lord Summersile's father then kept this going out of love for the community and for the ways that they had brought back, and now he is also continuing those traditions. Howie delivers two amazing lines, which is, "I'm interested in one thing, the law," and he says that you are the subject of a Christian country, which I think is interesting as an idea to dissect. He's clearly not interested in the law. Like, the thing that he's most interested in is condemning these pagan people and their practices. He's not really doing much investigating of Rowan so much as roaming around pointing his finger at people and saying you're doing wrong things. And also when he says you're the subject of a Christian country, as if it's not something that you would believe in out of choice, but something you have to be subjected to, and that your belief is expected and mandatory and somehow enforceable by him as an agent of the law, I think is a very interesting thing to think about, especially in today's political climate. He then asks again if the exhumation can be carried out. He's kind of losing his rag by this time, and Summersile very coolly tells him that he has already agreed to that, so he doesn't know why he's still asking. He then goes to perform the exhumation, but finds in the coffin a dead hare. So, obviously, it's all been japes. So he goes back to confront Lord Summersile and demands to know where Rowan's body is. Howie then says he will return to the mainland and come back with a lot more police. Oh, joy of joys, but we've only got the one pub, so where are they going to stay? He then breaks into the chemist, because remember, he's only concerned with the law, and also breaking and entering. He digs around trying to find copies of the photograph or the negatives, and then in the end finds Rowan's picture, but whereas all the other pictures have loads of like bales of apples and bread and stuff in front of them, her pile is very small, and he surmises that she has been disappeared because of this bad harvest. He then goes to, I guess, the town library to research the May Day festivals, and they talk about the various roles of people in the pagan dances and things, which are still practiced in villages in the UK anyway, but about how in the past those would be sort of a forerunner to a sacrifice of animals or humans. He surmises, therefore, that Rowan is currently not dead, but being held as a future sacrifice for May Day because of the bad harvest, which, given that she disappeared like 8 months ago, is a bit weird. Like, why would you think they would hold on to her that long and not just kill her there and then? It makes no sense, but it's not going to, because it's all lies to get him here, which we know because this is an old film. He then gets rowed out to the plane, and the guy rows away again. Then he finds that the plane doesn't work, so that guy has to row all the way back out and be like, get in the boat, I'll take you back to the island. But it does take a week to row to the mainland, so I guess he's not going anywhere. He then vows to find Rowan all by himself, so you know that's going to end well because the whole community is against him. Justly so, because he's an idiot. He then follows the hobby horse man, who's like a figure from the story and is dancing through the streets. He overhears Summersall speaking to the masses that the sacrifice is planned for that afternoon at the beach, which sounds lovely. Sergeant Howie then confronts Mrs. Morrison, yells at her and says, "What mother are you that you would allow your child to be sacrificed?" Which is pretty funny when you think that the Virgin Mary allowed her son Jesus to be sacrificed for the glory of the Lord, and that Abraham nearly killed his own son because he thought it was what God wanted. Clearly there's parallels here, is what I'm saying. She then says, "You will never understand the true nature of sacrifice," which I think is an interesting idea that she would confront him with that, because there isn't really any kind of sacrifice in Christianity now. So all he's read about are like the stories and parables that feature it. He's never experienced it for himself, and boy howdy is he about to experience it for himself. He then proceeds to conduct an illegal house-to-house search because his only love is the law. No one seems to be that bothered by this, but he is tormented by a woman in a comedically small bath, some naked ladies, a clown doll, some kids who pretend to be dead, etc., etc. Everyone's just having a good time at his expense. He even searches a boat, which is just out in the harbour, I guess, but no clue as to how he gets there or gets back. He sees the baker baking a life-size bread man, who is apparently like part of the celebrations too, which is pretty cool. He also meets a guy who's has a costume with him, which is the costume of the Salmon of Knowledge, which cracked me up. And in searching what I guess was the Undertaker's, he finds a body in a coffin with only one hand, which becomes relevant in a moment. He then visits the pub, sees the landlord and Willow there, gets a whiskey from them, and then goes to bed for half an hour, I guess to recover from all of the luring. He's advised by the landlord to just stay in bed the whole night because he shouldn't be wandering around during their festivities. He then hears them outside his room talking about how they've got something that'll knock him out, and Willow is worried that it might knock him out for too long. She then comes into his room and places something by his bed while he obviously pretends to be asleep, and then leaves. And when he wakes up, he finds that it is like a hand of glory, so like a dead person's hand with the fingers alight, which is apparently meant to put him to sleep, but it doesn't work because he just blows it out immediately. He then attacks the pub landlord, steals his costume, which is a costume to look like Punch from Punch and Judy, and then joins the procession for May Day as the Fool. They then go through some different aspects of this procession, like little games and things that they do, before they reach the beach, and an offering of broken barrels of ale is given to the sea as a libation. Rowan is then unveiled up near a cliff face in front of a cave, and he runs to her, revealing who he is, and helps her to flee into the cave. He follows her on a route through it, which leads them out through an upper hole onto the cliff top, and once they are there, she runs to Lord Summersall, and Sergeant Howie realises that he is surrounded by the village people. Lord Summersall then says that he came of his own free will, and that last year was their first failed harvest since his grandfather bought the island, so I guess this is the first time that they've had to do this, which is interesting because their readiness to do it is quite shocking, really, if you think of it that way, that so far all they've been asked to do is dance around maypoles and throw beer into the sea, and then this year it's like, let's kill a man, and everyone's like, yeah, sure, I'm game for that. They have decided that he's going to be a sacrifice. They did some sort of research which is not very clear as to how or why they did it, but basically they researched him, decided he would be perfect, and then lured him here because he is, amongst other things, a virgin, a fool, and has the power of a king because he comes here and demands respect for the law. He maintains that he will be resurrected, as is Christian dogma, and that he is very disparaging of their rights and whether they will work or not. He says to the people gathering around him to take him to his death that this is murder, which I think they know, but okay. And he denies the sun god, and he raises an interesting point that this is the first time that they've done this, and he says that the reason their harvest failed is because these new strains of fruits and vegetables are failing, and that means that next year they'll fail again, and then they will have no choice but to sacrifice Summersile himself. Now, I don't know how he came to this conclusion, because apparently they've been here for like 100 years, and this is the first harvest that has failed. So if the strains were failing, surely they would have failed before now. But it's interesting, this idea that he kind of puts it back on Lord Summersile and says, hey, you're kind of getting me to fill in for you because you are the one who should be sacrificed. And it does seem that does unnerve Summersile a little bit. And what I found interesting about Summersile as a character is that he doesn't seem to necessarily believe in the things that the rest of the people do. It's very much a thing of like his grandfather revived these customs in order to a certain extent, control the populace and get them to work for him. And now he is keeping it going because it gives him a lot of power, it gives him a role to play in a community that he is basically the god of. So in some ways, Summersile is their god. They then put him in the Wicker Man, because that's the name of the movie, and then he prays and curses them alternately and is then consumed by fire, as are some geese and a goat. Now, I think this is quite interesting because obviously, from the way it's set out, the film is meant to be unnerving to people who put themselves very much in Sergeant Howie's shoes. They are afraid of being confronted with the strange, the unusual, things that go against their deeply held beliefs about Christianity. And not just that, but about these conservative family values where like sex is bad and to be kept in marriage and things like that. From a modern perspective and as a pagan, it's quite interesting to me because what I read the film as is being kind of a cautionary tale about the leaders of belief systems, and when those belief systems kind of stop being a natural part of life and being something that helps to make you a better person and start being something that you depend on like a crutch and are slavishly obedient to. So he's already there. Howie's already at that stage where he, even though he is being given free rein on this island, even though he can do anything he wants, he decides to stick with the rules of his religion for a god that he has never seen, cannot see, and cannot know. So he's already completely devoted to his beliefs. And then we have the people of Summersile who have these beliefs where they are joyous and free, but there's also fear. They're also afraid of their god and have seemingly been very quickly persuaded into murder in that god's name. So they're on kind of this tipping point where they are about to go down the same road that Howie's kind of already on, where he will do anything in the name of his god and believe himself to be just and right. And they are kind of arriving at that point, led by Summersile, who is, I guess, kind of a figure like the church, in that it's unclear whether he genuinely believes in the existence of this god, but he is willing to use that for his own benefit to acquire power, prestige, and control over a more credulous population. So in that sense, I do think this comes across as quite a witchy movie, because there are questions that we need to ask ourselves about, like our own leaders, our own clergy. There are some people who are not on the up and up. There are some people who take advantage of these beliefs, and people who want to make these beliefs more similar to Christianity. As we read in The Wiccan Warrior, people who want to be accepted as a real, quote-unquote, religion. And that to them means that we have to represent Christianity as much as possible. So in that sense, I think it is quite a witchy film. It has definitely got a lot of those pagan things depicted in it. Some of the things like hagstones, corn dollies, even some of the dances and rituals, they definitely look like some of the pagan rituals that I've seen in like photographs, in documentaries of like actual pagans. So that's quite good content, but also I think it is quite good for kind of considering the pagan community itself, and it's sort of weirdly circled back around. So it's not just talking about the dangers of just faiths that aren't Christianity, but it's talking about faiths that become like Christianity, and I think that's quite interesting. That's my own interpretation anyway. Obviously, a lot of people are going to see this differently, but it is a very interesting film. And although a lot of people had said it was boring and quite slow, because obviously the whole time now you're just waiting for a man to be put in a big wicker dude and set on fire, it was quite interesting. And the slow realization that these people who on the surface of it seemed completely normal and then became less and less normal the longer he spent with them was quite disturbing in its own very, very subtle way. So I'm quite excited now to watch the spiritual sequel, to watch Midsummer, which is, I guess, sort of going to be a little bit of the same. And I'm not at all excited to dive back into the Wicker Man comedy remake, but my excitement mainly lies in the fact that Vanda does not want to watch it, and we're going to have a good time, getting very drunk and screaming about bees until Vanda's boyfriend tells us to be quiet. So I cannot wait for that, and I hope you can't either. If you'd like to get in touch and let me know if you've seen The Wicker Man, if you judge me for waiting this long to see it, how dare you? And any other films that are like it that you think I might enjoy now that I have finally seen the original and can now enjoy other things that are more derivative of the subject matter. So do get in touch, and in the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye!